Hey guys, welcome to this special episode of Doc Fiends. Today we are going to be doing something a little different than reviewing an actual documentary. And the first brand that we're going to be covering is Chiquita, the successor of the United Fruit Company. Around the turn of the 20th century, bananas were selling like crazy. Its safety from contamination, along with its relatively low price, its relatively high caloric content, and its overall status as a healthy food, led to its popularity. And at that time, the average American was eating more than 25 pounds of bananas yearly. Now, the company that we know as Chiquita and once was United Fruit Company was formed in 1899 from the merger of the Boston Fruit Company with Minor C. Keith's Banana Trading Enterprises. For much of the 20th century, United Fruit dominated portions of almost a dozen countries in the Western Hemisphere. And according to author Peter Chapman, it was more powerful than many nation states, a law unto itself, and accustomed to regarding republics as its private fiefdom. If it weren't for United Fruit, the banana would have never emerged from the dark and then arrived in such quantities as to bring the prices that made it available to all. At its peak, United Fruit controlled as much as 90% of the overall banana market. Through a subsidiary company, United Fruit Company owned and controlled not just the banana business and the land that the plantations were on, but much of the country's most important infrastructure. I'm talking about railways, hospitals, ports, and telegraph lines. Many local populations in countries where United Fruit maintained influence called United Fruit the octopus, El Pulpo, because they literally had their tentacles in everything. They used violence to further their private interests. United Fruit also used clever cerebral means to try and further their interest, and you can't discuss United Fruit without discussing Edward Bernays. Often referred to as the father of public relations, Bernays in 1928 published his seminal work, Propaganda, in which he argued that public relations is not a gimmick, but a necessity. Here's a great quote from him. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, and our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of, and it is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. That is scary. And his ties to the company continued to run deep, even using media campaigns to attack politicians who opposed United Fruit's interests. And last but not least, let's talk about the blood on the hands of United Fruit. Now, it's no secret, the United States had been meddling in the affairs of Central and South America for decades, and they used the Monroe Doctrine as justification for doing so. We're going to cover the biggest and most well-known instances here. First instance that I wanted to mention takes place in 1910 and involves that guy, Sam the Banana Man, Sam Zamurray, that we mentioned earlier. Um, and this is before his company was absorbed into United Fruit. Zamurray buys 5,000 acres along the Cayamel River in Honduras to establish plantations. Soon after Zamurray purchases the land, he discovers that the Honduran president, Miguel de Villa, would not grant him the tax, land, and transportation concessions that he was seeking. Zamurray decides to organize and finance a military coup that would replace de Villa with Manuel Bonilla. Within weeks after arriving at the port of Trujillo, the government falls and de Villa is replaced by Bonilla. The new president awards Zamurray generously and grants him the contracts he needs to incorporate the company in Honduras. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. In 1951, Jacobo Arbenz wins the presidential election in Guatemala and promises to change the agrarian structure of the country, and next year the Guatemalan Congress passes these reforms. The Arbenz government declared that 209,842 acres of uncultivated lands of United Fruit should be expropriated and distributed to landless peasants. The Guatemalan government promised the company an indemnification of $627,000 in governmental bonds. The value of this indemnification was based on the company's declared tax value of the land. Just valuing it what you said it was. The U.S. Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, sound familiar, airport, CIA, sends a protest note to Arbenz declaring that the indemnification value calculated by the Guatemalan government was not fair. On June 8, 1954, using military bases in Nicaragua, Guatemalan Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas attacks Guatemala in what his supporters called the Liberation War Against Communism. The operation was backed by all the other Central American governments and the United States. Castillo, succeeded at forcing Arbenz to go on exile and immediately ended the legal actions against United Fruit. Now, Guatemala was not the only instance of United Fruit meddling and shaping political landscapes. Their horrors have deep roots in Colombia as well. They exploited their workers all throughout the century in Colombia. United Fruit was paying their entire Colombian workforce of more than 30,000 people with company credit only good at company stores. Local farmers were largely impoverished, and since they were forced to grow specific crops, they created a monoculture in which farmers depended on the company for all food, products, and wages. And when workers held a strike to demand payment in cash, the company called in the Colombian military, who proceeded to break up the strike with armed conflict. Over the next few days, it is estimated that up to 3,000 workers and their families were killed by the military forces in what became dubbed the Banana Massacre. Workers began rioting and destroying the Colombian capital, leading to the death of 4,000 people. When news had reached the countryside, the local militias were furious and immediately started a civil war known as La Violencia, the violence. Joined by fellow leftists, a brutal war was fought for over 10 years, leading to the death of over 200,000 people and the destruction of much of the country. As La Violencia wound down, most self-defense and guerrilla units made up of Liberal Party supporters demobilized. But at the same time, some former liberals and active communist groups continued operating in several rural enclaves. The goal of the FARC, among other things, was redistribution of the land that would benefit poor peasant farmers, along with the desire to establish a communist state. La Violencia would last for decades, and it was only in 2012 that there was dialogue in Havana, Cuba, between the Colombian government and guerrillas of FARC. Now, after almost 4 years of peace negotiations, the Colombian state and the FARC announced consensus on a 6-point plan towards peace and reconciliation. Throughout this entire period, United Fruit continued to destabilize the region for decades, fueling the ongoing conflicts between the government and the guerrilla groups. During the 1990s and early 2000s, in order to protect its operations, at the time it was Chiquita Banana, but we're going to be, continually referring to it as United Fruit. Either way, they began making payments to the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AUC, a right-wing paramilitary group. This group was responsible for numerous human rights violations, including massacres, forced displacement of communities. The payments, they totaled over $1.7 million between 1997 and 2004. The AUC hit squads performed many murders on behalf of United Fruit's interests, and eventually this collaboration became public knowledge. The company admitted that it knew the AUC was a violent group and that the payments were illegal, but they claimed that it had no choice but to make them in order to protect its employees and its operations. In December 2013, the Washington Post revealed a covert CIA program started in the early 2000s, which provided the Colombian government with intelligence and GPS guidance systems for smart bombs. In 1975, Eli M. Black, the chairman and president of United Fruit at the time, jumped to his death from the 44th floor of the Pan Am building in Manhattan. When the SEC investigated Black's suicide, it uncovered the scandal that would come to be called Bananagate. United Fruit had paid $1.25 million in bribes to the Honduran president Oswaldo López Arellano, followed by another $1.25 million the next year. In addition, it was discovered that United Fruit had paid another $750,000 in bribes to an Italian official to prevent restrictions on their banana exports to Italy, and that started in 1970. The American banana market has changed little since the early 20th century. A handful of large companies control over 80% of the banana market still, and this exclusivity allows them to get the best land, transport prices, and political climate to grow their bananas. Now that the two large banana companies, Chiquita and Fifths, have merged together to reform United's past monopoly, the market has become even more exclusive. Next time you peel a banana to slice into your cereal or for a quick snack, think of all the heartache and bloodshed that has accompanied that fruit and the profits that it carried with it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit of useless knowledge, and I really appreciate you guys watching. If you've made it all the way through, it would be greatly appreciated if you could hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time.